ready to rumble. Schilling Show Unleashed on the Seven Thunders Media Network. Former city councilor, husband, father, and community watchdog. Your host, Rob Schilling.
Well, good evening and welcome to the Schilling Show Unleashed in a special Facebook live presentation. I thank you for your attention to this. It's so important. I wanted to talk about the events of January 6th, 2021, and in Washington, D.C. very particularly. I want to start off this conversation by saying that violence is not the answer. Now, there's a time for violence, but breaking into the Capitol probably wasn't a very good idea for many, many reasons. Someone lost their life. A lot of credibility was lost as a result, and we're not really sure who was behind that. But violence is not the answer in this case. If you're being physically attacked, if someone you love is being attacked, there is a time to defend yourself, and there is a time to go on the offense. This probably wasn't it. I want to also say that self-control is a fruit of the Holy Spirit, and for people who have a biblical worldview, you understand that sometimes emotions and passions can carry us away, but we want to make sure that we are exercising self-control at all times. This is important going forward. Also, if you break the law, you need to go to jail. Now, this needs to apply broadly, and the problem that we've had is that there have been a whole lot of people breaking the law over the past several months, very visibly, but over many years now, who have not been treated equally to other people who are breaking the law. This is an important concept. It's called equal justice under the law. Our former Commonwealth's attorney, Robert Tracy, here in Albemarle County, said that was his campaign slogan. We have a new Commonwealth's attorney, Jim Hingley, here in Albemarle County, who decides who goes to jail and why, and depending on what law they broke and who they are, that's no way to run a country, and that causes a lot of problems. So I want to start out by talking about this mostly peaceful protesters mantra that was given by the mainstream media over the course of time as we were watching cities being burned to the ground, people being given room to riot in Baltimore, 5 linear miles of shops and businesses being burned down in Minneapolis over the summer, that these were quote-unquote mostly peaceful protesters. But what I want to bring to your attention right now is that that same phrase was not used yesterday at the media coverage of Washington, D.C. and what took place at the Capitol building. There have been estimates anywhere from 200 to 500,000 people there, and they were mostly peaceful. It's not to say there weren't some people there that were angry, because they were. Anger is a human emotion, but the vast majority of them were not violent and did not come for the purpose of violence. So the fact that they now are calling this an insurrection, a rebellion, riots, and all of that is very inconsistent with what they did before, when the leftists were rioting and destroying businesses and burning and looting and stealing, which is not what took place yesterday. Those were called mostly peaceful protests. You understand now that the media is complicit with the Democrat Party in how they're portraying all of this. I know many people who went to Washington, D.C. to express themselves. I know them well enough and long enough to know they are not violent at their core. They were angry, many of them. Some of them were just going to show support, but they were not looking for violence. Also want to acknowledge and offer prayers to the family of Ashley Babbitt, who was executed, and we'll have to get to the bottom of that shooting and whether it was necessary and under what circumstance it took place. But I have seen graphic video, and it is absolutely horrible. The Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, grants us a right to peaceful assembly. Here in the United States, that's largely been protected for a long time. And so when you assemble at something like this, you do need to remain peaceful in order to maintain your right. However, we also have a right to petition to seek redress. I believe a lot of people believed, and they showed up here, that their elected quote-unquote representatives were not listening to them, were not paying any attention. And so there was tension in the air surrounding this gathering. We have reports that there were Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and other agitators on hand. That may well be the case. I'm not sure who was responsible for some of the violence that was caught on camera, but I do think it's important to acknowledge that there may have been some false flags. There may have been some plants in the audience that were causing problems. There has been some facial recognition software that was employed, and some people have been identified. I don't have further information on that, but I wanted to acknowledge it. Here locally in Charlottesville, Larry Sabato at the Center for Politics at the University of Virginia and the president of the University of Virginia, Jim Ryan, that's a corrupt institution. You know it very well. You see, they called this a coup, and they were coming on the air. Both of them were making public statements, particularly Larry Sabato in the national media, referring to what happened in Washington, D.C. as a coup, referring to President Donald Trump as the worst president in the history of the United States of America, and then admonishing people that voted for Donald Trump, this is what you get when you vote for a Donald Trump. It was a despicable comment, but it shows you where Larry Sabato and also Jim Ryan are coming from at the University of Virginia. And I've got to ask them, is stealing an election a coup? Because many of the people have legitimate questions, the people who were in Washington, D.C. yesterday, about whether or not this election was legitimate, whether or not there was cheating, whether the election was stolen. And I think those questions have yet to be answered. It's highly unfortunate the courts didn't take up the issue. And then I have to ask, at the University of Virginia, was it a coup when Mother Teresa Ryan, the former president of the University of Virginia, was dismissed from her job, and a number of faculty and students had an uprising and an insurrection and returned her to her position even though she had been rightfully dismissed? I didn't hear them calling that a coup, but I think under their terms it certainly could be classified that way. There's plenty of hypocrisy to go around at the University of Virginia. I also noticed the attack on government property was being treated much differently than the attack on private property, the attacks on private property that we saw going on over the summer, but really over the past several years, as violent leftists across America, whether it be in Portland or in Minneapolis or in many other cities, Baltimore, where things were burned, looted, stolen, there was violence done, and these things were let go by many of the Democrats. Even some of the Republicans who complained about what happened yesterday and expressed concern were almost completely silent on this ongoing parade of leftist violence, stealing, and looting that was going on, burning, destruction over the course of the summer and even before that. Thousands of private businesses across America have been burned, tens of thousands, maybe more people thrown onto the welfare rolls or out of a job, and there was very little condemnation, particularly coming from the left. Then we've seen people threaten in their homes, most recently Senator Josh Hawley, but Mitch McConnell and others, the violent leftist mobs surrounding the houses. And so I think people saw all of this and decided, well, if that's the rule in America, it's not necessarily where we want to go, but we should be allowed to have the same privilege of behaving badly if we're angry as the left does. And as it turned out, that was not allowed. There was a total double standard by the media. Don't forget that senators were attacked, people like Rand Paul and others, he and his wife leaving the White House of all places where they should have been as safe as could be. They were attacked by a mob. The police did absolutely nothing or very little to protect the people leaving that event. Did you forget also that the White House was stormed by BLM activists? At the end of May of this year, the president had to be put into a safe house, basically underground, to be protected while Secret Service agents and others were being threatened outside of the White House. The Capitol Senate building was stormed during the Kavanaugh hearings in October of 2018. Again, we didn't hear any of the insurrection talk or any of the sorts of criticisms that we're hearing right now. They were very hushed compared to what we heard about yesterday. And then there were the national monuments that were toppled and desecrated recently in Washington, D.C. The police did nothing or next to nothing to protect those monuments and those symbols of this country, the United States of America. I understand why people are upset, why they feel frustrated and unheard. Individuals have been attacked by left-wing mobs, Antifa, BLM, and others in very public places. Maxine Waters, a congressman out of California, calling for heckling and harassment in public, saying if you see anybody from that cabinet, referring to President Trump's cabinet, in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out, you create a crowd, you push back on them and tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere. This coming from a United States Congressman, Maxine Waters, out of California, telling the public, inciting violence against members of the president's cabinet, and the list goes on and on. Let's not forget Corey Stewart, a candidate for statewide office who came to Charlottesville a few years back. I've captured all of this on video. It's documented on YouTube and at the website schillingshow.com. And Corey Stewart came to town to speak at a political event in Lee Park, was run out by violent leftists. Later, attending a restaurant, the Melting Pot on the downtown mall, the leftists found out he was there, went into the restaurant and ran him, his wife, and his party out of town. The police were notified of this event in the park, and they said, it's not our job to protect political candidates. This is the double standard that we're dealing with in law enforcement, in the courts where we have crooked and corrupt judges, and also in the prosecutors' offices who do not equally apply justice. And one final reminder, what about Woody Kane, the son of Tim Kane, who participated in an Antifa riot in the Minnesota State Capitol back in March of 2017? The description of the event said that the rioters used mace, tasers, smoke bombs, and firecrackers on members of a pro-Trump rally at the Minnesota State Capitol, and they punched others in the face. Woody Kane was arrested. His father, Senator Tim Kane, said, I love and support my son. That's about as much as he said about the incident. And then, did you hear what Tim Kane had to say yesterday and today about the events in Washington, D.C.? Plenty of hypocrisy to go around. In many ways, yesterday in D.C. was reminiscent of Charlottesville 2017 in the summer, where we had serious problems here in the city when outsiders came and fought battles on our streets. But the thing that's most similar is that we had a media complicit in fostering a lingering, deceptive narrative. And I believe that the media fostering the narrative from yesterday, not telling the truth, not even a good portion of the truth about what took place, who was there, who were the bad actors, and who behaved themselves very well. This will linger on. This has already been branded by the media as an insurrection, and I don't think that's going to change. Then there is the blaming of President Trump. Fox News this morning on their radio broadcast over and over accused President Trump of stoking anger for months, laying this at his feet. Of course, the attempts to block him from communicating with the American public, Twitter and Facebook cutting him off. The discussion by high-level officials and, again, the news media complicit of invoking the 25th Amendment as if President Trump should be removed from office because he's not fit to serve there anymore. NBC News said radical conservative activists and allies, notice the word radical, of President Donald Trump quickly began to spread disinformation about the Capitol riots, claiming with no evidence that pro-Trump protesters photographed breaking into congressional chambers were actually Antifa activists. So they accuse conservatives, what they call radical conservative activists and supporters of the president, of spreading disinformation. I ask you, who's really spreading the disinformation here? What we need to do now is figure out where we go from here. And thank you for sticking with me. I'm going to wrap up right now. The media and the government are now in full collusion. The media, which was meant to be a check on the government, has aligned itself with the globalists and the leftists and now is an enemy, unfortunately, largely an enemy of people who love the United States of America. I'm telling you that you probably ought to expect the rise of social scores like they have in Red China. Social scores now, if you don't behave properly on social media, you will be monitored and punished for it. We could anticipate a purge. There have already been efforts to get me off the air because I helped to, quote unquote, aid the insurrectionists. And more and more and more of this will be coming. So batten down the hatches. It's going to be a rough ride ahead. There will be very little justice. And for the people that love America, don't give up. That's the encouragement I want to leave you with tonight. Hey, support us online at schillingshow.com. become a supporter on Patreon. Just go to shillingshow.com and click the banner at the top of the page. Please share this broadly with others. This is important information. You need to hear it from a local perspective. We are all in this together, the people that love America, and we've got a lot of work to do ahead. Thanks for joining me here on the Schilling Show Unleashed Podcast.